Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Hey, I'm Greer. Welcome to the Unfinished Idea podcast, a space for you to expand your understanding about the neurodiverse world, which is all around us. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, everyone is welcome to join us as we help bring awareness and better understanding about those who are neurodivergent and families who are raising children with special needs. I'm a mom to 2 boys and 2 dogs, and together with my husband, raising a child with additional needs. I often feel lonely and overwhelmed in my daily experience because life looks different for us. This podcast will share practical help, tips, and insights into the difficulties, joys, and differences of the neurodiverse world. So let's start the conversation. I'm joined by Katy to talk about her book, Girl Unmasked, a powerful memoir that weaves together her personal journey with OCD, ADHD, and autism, along with the insights she's gained along the way. Emily doesn't just share about her own experiences, but she also offers guidance for those navigating similar struggles and, well, for the friends and family who want to support them in a helpful way. I learned a lot from her book and this conversation. So let's grab your drink and let's jump in. So Emily, you have written a book called Girl Unmasked, and it's all about you and your journey. What is something from that book that you learned about yourself even as you were writing it?
Oh, that is such a good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. What is something that I learned about myself even as I was writing it? Well, I don't know. To be honest, I guess writing for me has always been like a coping mechanism that I've used throughout my life, like ever since I was a little child, really. And I think that writing Girl Unmasked really just showed that to me, the power of like being able to write about your experiences and kind of work through them in that way and kind of have the power to share them in the way that you want to share them rather than just in, you know, the way that things have happened to you. You know, through the mental health system, it can often feel like you're not in control. It can feel like the power's taken off you, decisions are made about you without kind of you being involved. Whereas actually writing Girl Unmasked meant that I could share my story from how I experienced it. And actually it was just such a cathartic process. Like it just really helped me to sort of kind of process everything that had happened and kind of move on from it. So I don't know if that's exactly what you meant by that question or whether it was more like, what did I learn about neurodivergence or autism or whatever? But actually the whole process of writing Girl Unmasked, yeah, it just showed me how much writing can do for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I listened to the book and you read it yourself. So part of this, I feel like I know you very well. So yeah, but I loved how you listening to it, and I assume it's written like this, is you share your personal experience. And then in a personal way, you also give kind of practical advice or help or tips. So I know a couple times you wrote like a letter to yourself about, you know, kind of, I think it was like your 10-year-old self when you were packing or, you know, things like that. And I just thought that was a really unique way of, I don't want to say you being you because I recognize I don't know you, but like the idea that you were sharing you, but you were also sharing with your audience ways that they can help and ways that they can support those who are neurodivergent. I wondered if there was one thing that you had written about that you would want to share with someone who wants to support their friend or their family member who is neurodivergent, but just isn't sure where to start. What would you say to them?
I think it's tricky because I think everyone is so different. Like just because I have the same, like just because I'm autistic and someone else is autistic doesn't mean that we have the same needs. But I think that it's about listening to them and actually asking them, you know, what do you need? Is there anything that I can do to support you? And just recognizing that, you know, certain things can be hard for people, for neurodivergent people, autistic people, that might not be hard for you, but that doesn't mean that they're making it up or that it's actually not really challenging. Like if you take kind of a noisy, loud environment, for example, that's can be really, really difficult to kind of sit in and to have a conversation in because your brain is processing so many different things at once. Whereas, other people go into those environments and are completely fine. But that doesn't mean I'm making it up. It's harder for me than it is for them. And I think it's just recognizing and understanding that everyone experiences the world differently. And for autistic people, those sensory environments are really hard. So what can you do to sort of support them? And I just think it's about being kind to everybody, isn't it? Whether they're kind of your friend's autistic or not, it's about being kind and trying to understand, what they find hard and what they like and meeting them where they're at. I guess that's it as well, isn't it? It's actually like as an autistic person, I spend so much of my life like adapting and trying to fit into environments and trying to, portray myself a certain way that people might think is more socially acceptable. Whereas like my friend just meeting me halfway and like just adjusting their communication style ever so slightly means that it's slightly easier for me. So it's that compromise, I guess.
Yeah. I like the idea of like, it's meeting in the middle. So it's not like you're asking them to come all the way to you, but you're also not being forced to go all the way to them. It's that kind of meet in the middle. And it's, like you said, kind of maybe just small little things that people can do in, how they communicate or how they meet up with someone or, things like that. So it's not always massive things.
Yeah, sometimes it's just the smallest of things. Like it's about, like, for example, I went on my friend's hen do last summer and I was so anxious about going because I didn't really know anyone. And like the whole weekend just filled me with such anxiety, but I wanted to go for her because, I was her bridesmaid and she was getting married and I wanted to go. But actually there was things of that other weekend that I couldn't manage. I didn't want to go clubbing. I didn't want to go to the bars. I, knew that sometimes I might need a little break and everything. And just her being non-judgmental about it and going, well, that's okay. Do what you can do. Join in with what you want to. And then you don't have to join in with it all. Meant that actually I was able to be there to celebrate her and have a good time. So she felt happy because I was there, but also I felt like I could be there because I didn't feel I was going to be forced into environments that I felt I couldn't cope with. Yeah.
That's a really good point as well of like thinking about events or, like Hindus or weddings or like things like that of being like, you don't have to go for the whole thing or participate in the whole thing, but you going for a little bit or it kind of in and out of things is still you being there and still, you getting to participate in these life events or kind of bigger events. It's not an all or nothing. I think that's sometimes for myself, I think all or nothing. So it's a good reminder.
It feels like that, doesn't it? It feels like if you can't like go and do everything, say like on the Hindu, if you feel like you can't go and do any of that, it feels like you can't go. But you can. If your friend is accepting and willing to try and understand and just let you get on with it and isn't kind of unkind about that, you can go. And it's just having that confidence to be able to, I mean, that's something I've learned definitely over the last few years, and I'm sure we'll continue to learn, is that confidence to advocate for yourself and actually be like, I really can't manage that and I'm not going to force myself to go into a club because I've done that before and it went awfully and I don't need to put myself through that. So it's having that confidence to be able to advocate for yourself because you don't have to do things that you feel you can't do or that you don't want to do, even though sometimes it feels like we have to.
Yeah. How have you learned to advocate for yourself? Kind of how have you done that?
I feel like I'm very lucky in that, being, as I talk through Girl Unmasked, obviously it talks about how difficult it was growing up undiagnosed autistic, right? But I was diagnosed at the age of 16. And that is so much earlier than so many other people, right? Like diagnosed years and years, decades later, right? Whereas although for me it was really, really hard up until that point, and it still was after that point, and it still can be hard now, actually having that knowledge that I was autistic then has really helped me kind of going into my 20s and like now in life, because I have an understanding of why things are harder for me than they might be for other people, and actually what sort of things might be hard for me, like noise and like meeting strangers and conversations and like social expectations and all of that. And I can understand that, and actually I can explain it in ways that maybe other people are more able to understand because there's a reason for it. I don't think you should have to have a diagnosis. There are probably people that aren't autistic who struggle with certain things, and they shouldn't have to have to justify it using a diagnosis. But I know that for me that it has been helpful because it's allowed me to understand myself more than I did before, and to be able to say, I find these things really hard because of XYZ, and actually I want to join in, but I need to be able to do this in order for it to be okay. And I think that also comes from actually just knowing that I have tried to force myself into different environments and like force myself through things, and it's just not gone well. Like I've had a meltdown or I've got upset and anxious, and then that's no fun for the other person either, because then their like day is like not as fun as it would have been had I been all happy. So it's trial and error, kind of learning through the process that you can't just keep forcing yourself into environments that hurt you, because it's just going to keep breaking you down, and like eventually you just won't be able to cope with it. So yeah.
You talked in your book about having OCD and just kind of the realities of that. And that's something that I actually know. I've done, the general Google, but you're the first person to really talk about it from your personal experience that I have heard or read. And something that you talked about was it's out of your control. That's something that's really stuck with me. Could you talk a little bit more about that, of kind of how is OCD out of your control? What is something that I feel like that was a misconception for me, at least, and maybe others, that OCD isn't, I always thought it was in your control. It's literally like you're quote unquote controlling it, but actually the reality is it isn't. So could you just, talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So I guess for anyone who doesn't really know what OCD is, because I think there's a massive lack of understanding of what OCD actually is. So OCD is a mental health condition, also neurodivergence because it's a difference in the brain, but a mental health condition where someone experiences obsessions and compulsions. Now, those obsessions are repetitive, intrusive, distressing thoughts, images that enter your head, and actually you kind of latch onto them and you think, oh my goodness, I'm having this thought, that's really scary. Those thoughts cause distress and they're not wanted, so you don't want to be having them. And then the compulsions are kind of reactions to those obsessions. So whether it's to try and neutralize the thought or to try and reduce the anxiety that is associated with the obsession. So my OCD when I was a teenager was very much revolved around contamination, which is kind of the most stereotypical form of OCD. But I do also talk about some of the other types in there as well. But so I would be very, very worried about germs and contamination and making myself ill and then making other people ill and thinking that, my parents are going to die because I'm giving them some deadly illness. And that is so distressing. So then those compulsions come of me trying to, clean myself and wash my hands all the time and not touch certain things, because actually then I think I'm going to make other people sick. And I mean, nobody chooses to live in that kind of state of anxiety and distress where those thoughts are just constant. Like there was a time when those thoughts took up 99% of my waking time and those compulsions were taking hours and hours. Yeah, I mean, you don't choose to live like that at all. And it doesn't necessarily feel like a choice to act on those compulsions, because I felt like if I didn't, then my parents were going to die and then I was an awful person. So it wasn't a choice for me just to act on those things. I mean, it was, as I got older, a bit of it was a choice to sort of work on it, to once I recognized that it was OCD and that I couldn't just keep living like that, and that I could see that other people were able to get better from OCD and things. Like it was a choice for me to work on that, to reduce the compulsions and to engage in the therapeutic process and all of that. But it's not those thoughts that you have come into your head. And I guess contamination is an easy way, I think, to understand OCD. An easy way, the stereotypical way that people tend to think of. But actually OCD has affected me in a lot of other ways too, like kind of thinking that I'm going to go to hell, even though I wasn't really sure if I believed in a God, but thinking that everything I was doing was sinning and I was going to end up burning in flames, and having these thoughts that I would think, oh my goodness, that's a really bad thought. That makes me an awful person. Do I want to hurt someone? No, of course I don't want to hurt someone, but actually why did I have that thought? And it's hell is all I can describe OCD as. It's like controls your everything about your life until you're able to not let it and to kind of get better from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And how, like you said, you kind of mentioned like you don't have a choice until you can choose to work on it. Like what does that look like, working on it? How does that work out?
Yeah. And I suppose with the choice to work on it, I think it's hard because obviously not everybody is able to access therapy as easily as other people. And so it's not necessarily so easy as that. But at the end of the day, if you are living with OCD, the only way to get over it and to get through it is to kind of work through it. And I think, if you do have OCD, I would hope that you seek kind of medical professional help and actually therapy that can work well for OCD. So things like cognitive behavioural therapy, which we know can be difficult for autistic people, but exposure and response prevention therapy as well. So where you're kind of working on those compulsions. And I guess, so kind of one of the main ways about that exposure therapy is to sort of not act on compulsions or to do something that scares you. So for example, for me, it might have been touching something that I thought was dirty, contaminated, and then actually sitting with that anxiety and seeing that nothing bad happens. Now that is such a hard process. It sounds like it's easier than it is, because when you're sitting with that anxiety and that distress and that's all you can think about, it's so difficult. I think for me, it was recognizing and understanding that thoughts are not facts, and actually thoughts come into your head and that doesn't mean that they're true. and having to sort of sit with that and understand and just, allow them just to pass. Now that sounds easier than it actually is. But I also sort of grew to understand and view it as like OCD was trying to protect me almost. Like it was trying to protect me from this like scary, overwhelming world. And actually it thought that by me doing certain things, I was keeping myself and keeping other people safe. And that sort of reduced my anxiety. So I was able to do things I couldn't do otherwise. So I also tried to view it as my brain's kind of only way of knowing how to keep me safe and protect me. And when I saw it like that, instead of just being so angry at it and stressed at it all the time, that was again also a way that helped me through it. But it's really difficult. It's really hard.
Yeah. It's a really good point of for anyone really, not just someone who has OCD, of like your thoughts aren't facts, and kind of that idea of, someone who might struggle with anxiety or might have a million thoughts through their head and they're trying to captivate all of them. Like the idea that, you sometimes just need to let your thoughts pass through and just, I don't know, if the word kind of let them be is just coming to mind. But yeah, the idea that for anyone really, neurodivergent or not really, thoughts aren't facts. And to kind of do that fact check, ask someone else if you are having thoughts that you feel like are facts, kind of speaking to someone can help.
And I think being autistic makes that hard as well. I mean, obviously it's hard anyway, but when you are a very literal thinker and you take everything very literally, it's hard not to, especially when it's your thoughts in your brain. You think, well, how do I not take them literally?
Yeah, that's true as well. Yeah, that idea that, you do take things literally, and that can be hard.
And I also think it's so much easier for my brain to fixate on things because, we know with autism, it is easier to fixate on things and struggle to let things go. So when you've got OCD, it's just like that hyper focus on obsession. That's just not a good combination.
Yeah, you've gotten them all together.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Uh-oh, the last cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
How could someone, I'm thinking kind of maybe particularly a parent or a family member, help their child or, maybe their adult child kind of, again, like with OCD, help them to not take every thought as fact? How could they help and support them?
Oh, it's really difficult. And I do think it should be done with professional support. OCD is not simple to kind of work through and get over. I think it needs understanding, and there are treatments for OCD and therapies that can help. So I think about my mum and dad, and actually I don't think there was necessarily always a way that they could stop me fixating on it, but actually them staying calm, not getting angry, and listening to me and actually validating my worry, validating in the sense that validating the distress and the anxiety, and actually them saying, I can see that this is really upsetting you, and I can't, that's so much to have to deal with, but it's just that sort of that nurturing, loving approach where you're calm and not sort of angry and upset that can, I think, help, because the more that they can trust you to open up to you as well, the more that they won't feel like they're dealing with it on their own. And I think that's a massive thing, actually, I suppose, for a parent is to help the child not feel like they're on their own and to know that they are able to share what they're feeling. Because I think that if they've got OCD, and especially if it's kind of having that massive impact on their life, they're going to need support to work through that. But just them not feeling like they're on their own.
Yeah. So kind of validating the feeling of what they're feeling, going through, but also helping them be like a soundboard, being a safe soundboard, I think is what I hear you saying, of having their kids be able to come and open up and then, kind of.
Yeah. And, if there's any way that they can use distraction techniques, because I think with OCD, it's when you're sitting with that anxiety and distress, it's trying to distract yourself from it as well, which is really hard. But if there is ways that you can help your child to kind of distract themselves from the anxiety, that would be massive as well. Like it's not always going to work, but if you can get them involved in doing something fun, or you can, setting up good routines in the day where they know where they're at kind of through the day, getting up, going out, and if they can't, all of those sorts of things, that instead of them just sitting there dwelling on thoughts is obviously important.
Yeah, I know. So I struggle with anxiety, and I know there are times when I just need someone to come in and to interrupt my thought process, because I can very easily take weird, I have a conversation with someone that didn't go well, and then all of a sudden I've spiraled into they died somehow. It's like my brain can just quickly spiral. And so having someone come interrupt that thought can mean I don't spiral and I then don't fixate on them, that kind of thing. And so, having, like you said, distractions, having things in place can help as well.
Yeah. And I think with OCD as well, a lot of the time, that what you're thinking and doing is illogical. I knew that logically I couldn't stop certain things from happening by tapping a book 10 times. I knew that logically. And I think sometimes people be like, well, then why are you doing it? But it's just not that easy to not. And because of that distress anxiety associated with I'm a really bad person, that was for me. If I didn't do it, I thought I'm an awful person. So trying to build up my self-worth and my self-belief, I guess if my mum had what she did, just reminding you that, you are loved and actually you are a wonderful person for all of these reasons, and trying to build up your self-esteem as well is important.
Yeah. As an adult now, how would you encourage your 15-year-old self? It doesn't have to be OCD focused, but how would you encourage your 15-year-old self?
I mean, I would just tell her that it's all going to be all right, and that, her pain is so valid, but she's not just weird and she's not broken, and she will find her way, and she will find people that love her for who she is, and that she doesn't just need to keep squeezing herself into these boxes that don't fit for her, that she doesn't need to keep squeezing herself into these boxes that she doesn't fit into. And that with time and with, with patience, things would get better, because it just felt so hopeless, being an autistic. I mean, I have ADHD as well. So I was autistic, I had ADHD, neither of which I knew. I had OCD and anxiety and struggling with my mood. It just felt like there was no place for me in the world, and I would never be able to get through all of that. But that's also because I was 15 and I didn't know what life was like without being in school, and I didn't know what life was like without experiencing all of those things. The future contains so many possibilities that you can never know how it's going to go, and that means that there are so many possibilities of it being wonderful. And life is not always going to be easy, but you will not always have the same challenges that you have then. And you will develop coping strategies and ways to cope with things that you never thought you could cope with.
There's hope. That's a good reminder for anyone that there's hope.
That's all I needed to say. There is hope.
Yeah. No, but it's good. It's good to, that, there are, it will sound strange to say this, but it's good to be reminded there are other people who are feeling, that have felt hopeless, who have felt like there was no place for them. But seeing you now, knowing that there is hope and wanting to encourage them with that, I think that will be, yes, a good reminder. So we like to ask as the last question is, what do you want the world to know about neurodiverse people?
I want the world to know that we are here and we deserve to be supported, and we don't have to fit into boxes that we aren't designed to fit into, and that actually with the right support and the right kind of understanding, we can thrive as well. And sometimes we just need adjustments and things to be just tweaked ever so slightly, and then we can thrive. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good reminder. It's very true. You are here. We are here. My kids are here. And their voice should not be silenced and they should not be heard, because there's a lot of contribution that people who are neurodivergent can bring. I think about all of the creative kind of people and people who are pushing the boat.
We need difference, like, in the world. Like, if everyone was the same, the world would be boring. That's what they always say, isn't it? And I mean, when I was younger, I hated that so much because I didn't want to be different and I just wanted to fit in. But now I get that more. Like, if we were all the same, it'd be so boring. Like, we need different minds and different strengths. And, you know, it's just that obviously when you're neurodivergent, there are more extreme challenges as well. And we just need help with those things. And it doesn't always take a lot to make things a bit easier. It really doesn't. It can just take a simple, you know, is there anything that I can do for you? Or let me know if you're feeling uncomfortable, or, you know, have a 10-minute break if you need one. Like, it's just that flexibility, I think, and that willingness to be open and help someone. That's all it can take.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as well. This is probably a slight tangent, but there was a study done of primary schools, elementary schools that had visual timetables versus, so it's the same school, like half the classes had visual timetables, half didn't. And only those who needed the visual timetable had it on their desk, if that makes sense. So there was still, and the whole point was to try and see, it was all about accommodation basically. And the idea that the classrooms that had visual timetables for the whole class, as in at the front of the board, you know, everyone could see it, their behavior was like, I'm going to totally mess up the statistics, but it was drastically better. And like the learning, right? Like their test scores, their comprehension, like everything in those classrooms was extremely better than those who, than the classrooms that only those who needed the visual timetable had it, if that makes sense. And it, to me, just like was such a great example that accommodations aren't just for children who need them.
Yeah, because
yes, they help them.
Us can help everybody. So like I said earlier about like if you need a 10-minute break or if you need like to be checked in with, offering that to anybody is going to help anybody, isn't it? Like, yeah, I mean at work, during our team meetings, our manager often puts out like colouring books and fidget toys. Not everybody has ADHD. And you know, some people might find that that's distracting, but then they can use their adult brain and think, okay, I'm not going to do that because that's not going to help me. But actually for those of us that it does help, it helps. And some people find it helpful who don't have ADHD or aren't neurodivergent, but it's, you know, some of those adjustments that help us are helpful for everybody. It's about being inclusive and just meeting people where they're at. And everyone's got different needs anyway, whether they're neurodivergent or not. Being open and kind of willing to support everybody is going to make a big difference. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, having that voice in the room, like you said, making sure that neurodivergent people have a voice, it's just going to help bring even more accommodation and more, you know, creativity. And just, I always say neurodivergent people bring the color into a very black and white world, which is ironic since a lot of them think black and white in their thinking. But yeah, the idea that they bring a lot of color. So, well, thank you so much, Emily, for joining me today and having this conversation and just sharing more about your life. Thank you so much for having me. Did you know we do a bi-weekly, meaning every other week, newsletter? It has information about the podcast, some helpful resources, and, well, a point to ponder on. Plus, over the next few weeks, we have some, we'll say, secret surprises happening over on our email list. So use the link below to sign up and let's see what's happening.